Before we start today, I'd like to do an acknowledgement. So I'd like to acknowledge country, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge Gadigal country. We're part of the Eora Nation here, where there's 29 different language groups, and also to pay respect to your elders past, present and emerging, to acknowledge the country that you're meeting from. It's a real privilege to be able to share some of that cultural knowledge and wisdom today, to be able to connect to country, and hopefully you've spent some time outside on country today and taken in its natural beauty, and if you haven't, make sure you do.
We have some amazing schools tuning in from around the state. Want to give you a little shout out to Kurawatha School, who's joined us. We see you guys loud and clear. Yeah. We can't wait to be working with you. Give a shout out to Gloucester High, who's also with us. We've got some people from Cherrybrook tuning in as well, yep. And also St Paul's down in Vincentia. So g'day guys, and thanks for joining us. We're hoping that you're going to get a lot out of the session today. Kirli and I's aim is to guide you through not only a discussion around reconciliation and what it means, but actually to get you writing and get the pen on the page, thinking about actually how you can express yourselves around what is quite an interesting issue, can be quite a difficult conversation to have at times. So our goal is to share some words in language with you, and unpack what reconciliation means to both of us.
Absolutely. And I'm joining you today from Red Room Poetry. So I'm the manager of Poetic Learning over there. If you don't know about Red Room, teachers, there's lots of different resources on there for you to check out, particularly the Poetry Object Competition, which opened recently. So make sure you log on and download that free curriculum-aligned resource. At Red Room, we aim to make poetry a meaningful part of everyday life by connecting students in the classroom with poets to create and publish poetry in unusual ways. And this program has been delivered in collaboration with the New South Wales Reconciliation Council. So we're really, really honoured to be working with Reconciliation New South Wales, and to try and support you today to educate and inspire around ideas of reconciliation, and for all of us to come together on that reconciliation journey.
That's right, and it's a challenge, but also the challenge is and has been set, and you've got until August 30 to get an entry in to submit to the Reconciliation New South Wales Challenge, where we're getting you to send us a piece of writing, and it could be something that you produce out of this workshop, it could be something that you go away and work on after this workshop, or with your teacher, with friends. You might want to put together a script, you might want to put together some songs. What we're working on today is poetry. That's what we're using as our inspiration for today's writing workshop. Kirli, you're a poet, I'm an author, but we're both storytellers.
We are, yeah. And Posh, will you tell us a little bit more about your work? Because it's your book birthday today, which is really exciting.
Now, I know that most of the students tuning in right now are high school students, but I'm just going to be a little bit proud for a moment. I've got 2 new books out today. Woo-hoo! Maybe when you were younger, you knew the Ella and Olivia books. I have a new series out called Puppy Diary. Tackling all the big issues in that one, but also written lots of other kinds of works. And Kirli, you know, we've done things together, and today is really about also us using our author hat to try and explain to you some of the processes that we use as writers and storytellers to share with you so that you can go ahead and create something. Sometimes all you need is a little bit of inspiration.
Yeah, and I'm also a children's author and a poet and an educator. My family are Gunai people from East Gippsland in Victoria, and we have ties to Yuin country through my matrilineal lines, and then Gunai country as well. On my grandfather's side, we're Biripi people around Taree, with ties to the mission at La Perouse on Gadigal country there. So First Nations through and through, lots of saltwater connections in my family, and a strong history of dispossession and relocation, which we'll touch on a little bit throughout the workshop today. When I'm not managing poetic learning programs and poetry in First Languages, which sees our First Nations students learn Aboriginal languages, First Nations languages around Australia. I'm also writing myself, and I've got my picture book over here, The Incredible Freedom Machines, and my new poetry collection, Kindred, which came out recently, and I've been touring around Australia doing a few different launches, so it's really nice to be back in Sydney.
Well, it's great. And Kindred has some great poems about some deep themes around reconciliation. I think it is a real dialogue, what we're having here, and that's what we're really hoping that you get out of this session. I learnt so much about First Nations people from just getting to know you, Kirli, and our friendship, and from you, you know, teaching me about your family and your history and what it means to you. But reconciliation is a start of a dialogue, and it's a positive, open step forward for us to understand what's happened in our past so that we have a positive and meaningful future going forward.
Definitely. And so we're here today to prepare you for the Reconciliation Challenge. The school's Reconciliations Challenge is an annual project open from students in years 5 to 9, and it encourages them to submit, all of you, to submit a piece of writing, an artwork, a song, a dance, some kind of self-expression that explores the ideas of reconciliation and what reconciliation means to you. This year, our theme is speaking and listening from the heart.
It's probably a good jumping off point, Kirli, to talk about what reconciliation looks like today, what it could look like in the future, and what it means to both of us.
Definitely. Well, I mean, reconciliation for me is exploring our nation's history and having a really open and honest conversation. And I think that theme of speaking and listening to the heart is very much about that. You know, being honest in our family, in my family history means talking about being raised on missions. Our family was raised mostly on missions around Gunai country and also on Gadigal country. And then my mum was removed from her family as a child and raised separate from her family as a state ward in children's homes. So there's that strong history of dispossession and relocation, and unpacking all of those different intergenerational traumas within my family was a really emotional journey. And so many of the poems that explore those thematics are in this collection, Kindred. And the book has very much been about connecting to the earth to do that. So every time I feel that I'm reading a poem from that collection or I'm talking to those ideas and being honest in sharing that family history, that we're paving the way for reconciliation within our community. And I feel likewise, Yvette, that you do similar things in your own writing.
Well, you know, my family background, while I'm not a First Nations person, my family is, I've come from a very multicultural background. My dad was a refugee, he came to Australia. There are lots of commonalities between both our histories. And maybe that could be a starting point for a discussion in your classroom. Where do you come from? Who are you? How did your family get to be where they are? What is it going to look like going forward? How are you going to impact your community in a positive way?
Yeah.
It's a conversation for both sides to have, and that's really what we're talking about here today in this workshop. And actually one of the first questions that I had for you was actually around the language used. And actually, you know, First Nations people is the way that the language that we're using in this workshop. And maybe you just want to unpack that a little bit for us to explain some of the origins around the other word usage and how that can impact people.
So on page 9 here in the resource, there's a copy of the Aboriginal languages in New South Wales and ACT map, and you can see the diversity across the different language groups, each of them identified by a different colour on the map. Every one of those language groups has its own culture, dreaming, stories, ceremony, sacred places, and all of them are very, very diverse in the way that when you travel across Europe, you know, there are very big differences between France and Germany, and so the same is for Australia and First Nations Australia. The reason I prefer First Nations over Aboriginal is that I think First Nations talks to that diversity and that complexity in culture, whereas perhaps Aboriginal is a term that might be used without being able to explore that diversity and that complexity across the different communities, and it infers rather to the original inhabitants of this place, which I think First Nations also does. My general rule is to, if I'm talking to a First Nations person or an Aboriginal person, I like to know where their family's from, so I'll ask them, you know, do you identify as First Nations or Aboriginal, and where is your family from?
I think it's a really good opportunity in this workshop for you to start thinking about some of the bigger themes. Yes, we're talking about reconciliation. We're also going to be talking about things like the Constitution and what that has meant for First Nations people, it's meant for Australia, and also maybe think a little bit about all those welcomes to country or acknowledgements of country that you hear in school and at events in your community, and what that actually might mean and what that might look like.
Definitely. And if we bring that slide up again around reconciliation, you can see what we thought a few ideas around reconciliation were. So you can see that it's telling the truth about our nation's history, our shared history, and I touched on that a little bit before with my family. It's about speaking out about racism and not allowing for that to be a continued part of our day-to-day happenings in our society. It's about celebrating our First Nations people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's voices, cultures and languages as well. And that means inviting our First Nations community into the classroom and welcoming them to stay for more than just NAIDOC Week or Reconciliation Week. Recognising that we are and always have been and always will be on Aboriginal land, which I think is really important. And when we do those acknowledgements and welcomes that you mentioned, Yvette, we're talking to that and acknowledging that we're on that ongoing journey with empathy and respect.
Well, one of the coolest things I think about this workshop is that you're going to talk us through some first languages words and some language, and that was for me a real learning point and turning point as well. So we're going to be exploring a couple of words and looking at the meaning behind that. But I think your explanation of the dreaming, if you could shed a little bit of light, really has changed my perspective on what the dreaming means.
Yeah, so you can see in the images here just some photos from the project that I lead, Poetry in First Languages. We've got a few of the students from Daria School up in the Territory leaning over each other to write some poems together. One of the students down on the bottom right there listening to a poem floating through the water, and these were projected with marine speakers that spoke to that projected sound, poems recorded in Gadigal language with Joel Davison and Alan Giddy, an artist, flowing through the water there. So I think both of those talk about our languages as always having been there, and language to me is an integral part of connecting to culture and connecting to our country in a meaningful way. The dreaming was told to me to have 3 parts. So when I talk about the dreaming, I'm not talking about, that having a sleep, going and having a dream, but rather the cultural dreaming, the spiritual dreaming. You might have heard Dreamtime stories, but the Dreamtime stories are one element of that broader spiritual belief. The dreaming is our rights, our responsibilities within community. It tells us how to navigate our worlds and to give ourselves to community mindfully. The first part of the dreaming is to always take care of ourselves, to make sure that we're consuming food from country and therefore consuming country. Giving ourselves to country is the second part, making sure that we're always taking time to appreciate the earth and to care for the earth. And that means being sustainable, using our reusable bags, not littering the place, recycling where possible, and just being more mindful in our sustainability. And perhaps also seeing if you can care for threatened species. That's another part of the PIFL project that we really enjoy. And then that third part of the dreaming is to make sure that we share our gift with community. So we're the storytellers.
Well, I was just thinking about that, description of the dreaming. It's so much more than what I originally thought it was.
Yeah.
It's a really holistic approach to being on the earth. And when you think about it, storytelling has an incredible power.
Definitely.
And, we're both storytellers professionally, we're writers, and we're going to share some tips with you. But I was thinking about how sometimes language can either be a barrier or actually just even spending time with people, you can draw stories out of them. I was thinking about my grandmother, who actually was Armenian, and she didn't speak a word of English. Yet somehow we had this bond, and we somehow knew exactly what the other person was thinking, even though we had no common language. So sometimes you have language, sometimes you might have visuals. So we're also going to explore a bit later down the track how art might be a way that you express yourself. It might be a way for you to explore the idea of reconciliation.
And perhaps there's another gift that you have too. Perhaps you're a sports person. Maybe you're a person who is a healer or a carer within your community. Maybe you're a teacher. And I mean, even to the students in the room who might not be a qualified teacher yet, perhaps you're the person who shows mentorship and leadership and kindness to other peers, and you teach them things. There's lots of different roles within community that enable us to enact our gifts. So the first part of this writing prompt, which we'll bring up for you now, is for you to question yourself around what your gift is to community. So,
and maybe you could talk to your neighbour and just get a quick grab of what they think your strengths are, because they might be quite different to what you think they are.
Definitely.
Especially if you're sitting next to a bestie, that might be a good person to reach out to. But what's your gift? What's something that you know you're good at? Something that you know, and don't be shy, everyone's good at something. It might not be poetry, but you might be great by the end of this. That's our hope. That's our hope. So what's your gift? So Kirli, why don't you give us an example? What's your gift?
Yeah, I mean, I think my gift is to be the storyteller. And when I asked that my uncle about the dreaming, and he told me that the dreaming includes those 3 parts, the thing that I was like, Uncle, I'm really stuck. What is my gift? And he said, well, you're the storyteller. Go and tell the story. And whatever that looks like, it must always include storytelling. Whether you're a teacher, whether you work in community, storytelling is at the base of that. So I think my gift is storytelling. And then how do I contribute to reconciliation with that gift? Well, I share stories about our community. I share stories about my family and about our history to try and make those part of the regular literary landscape. And when I was born and growing, I didn't get to witness those kinds of stories within our community and, published in books. So it's a really exciting time for me. How about you? What's your gift, Posh?
Well, I'd say my gift is also storytelling, but, my passion has also been researching history. And so part of the reconciliation discussion means we actually have to look at some difficult things in our past.
Totally.
And so the whole discussion with reconciliation is an opportunity for us to understand what happened in the past, what happened to the First Nations people, but also understanding where we are going together as a nation.
Definitely.
And even in my writing, when I've come across some difficult things to write about, I wrote a book called Escape from Cockatoo Island, which some of you might know, about a very difficult time in Sydney's history and about a place that actually not much is known about. So my first step in actually even understanding what Cockatoo Island was, and for those of you that don't know where it is, it's right in the middle of Sydney Harbour. It's a beautiful island, but with a very sad past. And actually had a very sad past for First Nations peoples as well. I had to do a lot of research, a lot of digging. So if you're a writer, or if you're researching something, or if you have a passion for explaining or communicating, you have to go to the source. Definitely. So I had to go and ask lots of different people. Not everybody knew the answer. And it turned out that Cockatoo Island, even though we knew its white past as a colonial convict prison, and there were some terrible things that happened on there, it's actually a very sad place too for First Nations people, because it's where it was a burial ground. But I wouldn't have found out any of that information without going to my Aboriginal Land Council representatives, or Tribal Voice, who are a great organisation that I worked with in Sydney, who helped me understand and unpack how that island had been used for First Nations peoples.
And I really love too, Yvette, that you sort about asking your community before researching, before Googling, because I think there's definitely merit in going to Google or turning to secondary sources like that, but going to the local community and asking them explicitly with respect and kindness, and the knowledge that not all First Nations people hold the kind of knowledge that we might expect them to, and because of our nation's history, I didn't know all of my language until I really started that language learning journey. But to go to community first and engage them in the conversation around your writing, I think is really powerful.
Well, maybe your gift, or maybe everyone who's watching's gift to with regard to reconciliation, could be starting up a NAIDOC week event. Opening up a dialogue with friends in your class that you might not know a bit about their background, or you might not know that much about your neighbour. Actually going out and talking can be a really great first step.
Yeah, and we might give you 1 or 2 more minutes just to finalise that piece of writing, and then we're going to go into the next bit. Excellent. So I can see you all madly writing, and it's really exciting to see you putting your ideas down on paper. Some next thoughts that we wanted to prompt within you to have a bit of a discussion with your peers were around the ideas of reconciliation more broadly and what that might look like, because we're going to write a collaborative poem moving forward. But I thought when reflecting on reconciliation, there's 2 words that really came to mind, and Ngunagula is one of them. And Ngunagula is a Gundungurra word, which means walking together and working together. And so I wanted to share that.
Say that together.
Yeah, and it's written up the top there, so you wouldn't expect it to be spelt that way, or I definitely didn't. This word was told to me by Auntie Valmore Kay up in the Southern Highlands, and Auntie Trish Levitt, both of whom have taught me the Gundungurra language that I know, so a lot of gratitude to both of them right now. And Ngunagula is the word. If we can say it, 1, 2, 3. Ngunagula. Good job. Another word that I have is mirin, and I thought that was a really beautiful word for reconciliation because it means belonging. Another Gundungurra language word, and that language word is from around the Southern Highlands there in Mittagong and Barrel, so where I was raised. Ngunagula and mirin.
I wonder if you could use those 2 words in some kind of conversation today. Yep. You might want to go home and tell your family what you've learned. 2 new words that have really powerful meaning.
Definitely, yeah. And then more broadly, we wanted to know what reconciliation means to you. I spoke a little bit about it meaning, knowing my family's history, being aware of our nation's history, having honest conversations around those things so that we can move forward. Yvette, what's reconciliation mean to you?
Reconciliation is about envisaging a future where we're coming together truly. Now, we've talked about our aspirational thoughts around high-profile First Nations people, but I think it's really got to be, it comes down to one of us winning the Miles Franklin.
Yes.
Let's be honest.
Yes.
As writers, that's where we would want to be. But, you know, true reconciliation is about a positive dialogue. But, you know, it could be we have a First Nations cricket captain. I mean, that to me is a really great goal to have, because I'm passionate about sport. Some of my most, some of the figures that I look up to most are leading sports figures. So can you imagine if we had a First Nations cricket captain? I think that'd be pretty good.
First Nations Prime Ministers, First Nations teachers in schools. I had the privilege of working up in the Northern Territory recently, and I loved moving through the school and seeing custodians employed in every single school to support students with language learning and learning more broadly. And I just thought that presence of First Nations people, Aboriginal people within our educational settings, so that we could turn to them and ask them about culture or language or connection to country at any time, was really important and really valuable.
What about a First Nations Secretary for Education?
Oh, amazing.
I think we could start there.
Perfect. Yeah, and so we wondered, what does Reconciled Australia look like to you? And perhaps it's something closer to home. Maybe it's just having a bush tucker garden or a bush medicine garden available to you. I've got friends who have children that have never ever had antibiotics because they've always been able to access First Nations bush medicine knowledge, and so, you know, taking care of themselves with food from the earth and plant matter to try and heal all of their ailments at any time. Yeah.
I think reconciliation also is about equality, true equality for all communities.
Yeah, which to me would look like reconciliation would look like constitutional recognition of our First Nations people, which doesn't exist at the moment. Since the referendum, First Nations people were removed from the Constitution after originally being labelled as fauna and flora, plants and animals, not people, which to me is really heartbreaking and awful. That referendum saw that constitutional recognition removed, and so now we're not in there at all.
I know, but
having always been here 60,000 years, I'd like to be in the book, you know?
Well, maybe we've taken a positive first step forward, because we do have a Minister for Aboriginal Affairs who is a First Nations man.
Very exciting.
So that's a great start.
Yes, yes. And what does it involve? To me, reconciliation is you and I having a chat. Yep. It's us being really honest about how we feel and our different thoughts, and listening with empathy and understanding and kindness. But perhaps it looks like something slightly different to you. So we'll give you a few minutes just to have a chat in your classroom. What does it look like? What does it mean to you? And what does it involve? We also wanted to just have a quick shout out to Gaduga and Gloucester. Thank you so much for joining us.
We can't forget Janelli, down south. We can't forget them.
Our mates nice and close by. Yeah. Today we wanted to prompt you into some writing. So usually this would appear as a collaborative writing task where you might sit with your peers and jot down your ideas and begin to form a poem as a group. So perhaps you want to write this one as a group, maybe individually. We'll leave it up to you and your teachers. But in front of you are some writing prompts. And we wanted to support you to think about a sensory view of what reconciliation is for you in your classroom or for you within your own worlds.
And you know what the reality is? In the end, at the end of 5 minutes' time, you're going to have a poem.
Woohoo!
I mean, I get worried when I have to start thinking about poetry.
Well,
so my question to you is, does all poetry have to rhyme?
Definitely doesn't rhyme, doesn't have a particular form or structure. There are poems that do have certain structures. If you wanted to include some kind of similes or metaphors or alliteration or other literary devices, you're very welcome to.
But what we're starting with today is a sensory poem.
Yeah.
So we're getting you to explore the 5 senses. And that's how we started off. We've written a poem and we're going to share it with you as you guys go along.
Absolutely. So the first part is, what does reconciliation from the heart look like to you? So we're going to quickly have 1 minute to jot down your first idea. You only need to write that first sentence. What does reconciliation from the heart look like?
So we thought we might just help you out with our answer that we had for the first one, and there's no right or wrong answer. But for us, for Kirli and I, reconciliation from the heart looks like First Nations recognition in the Constitution. We just got to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
So that's our
Starting
first,
with the big things first.
Yeah. We just thought that was a very important thing for us, and that helped set the tone for the rest of our poem. So we hope you're travelling well. The next one we want you to think about is what it sounds like. Reconciliation from the heart sounds like.
So we thought reconciliation from the heart sounded like a First Nations Prime Minister being inducted into Parliament for the first time, and I would love to witness that. I can't wait for that moment, and perhaps we're talking to one of those First Nations Prime Ministers right now.
Oh, I hope so.
Super exciting. We wanted to know what reconciliation from the heart feels like to you, so that's our next prompt. What does it feel like?
Wow, we're really progressing with the poem here. So we had reconciliation from the heart feels like sitting with aunties and learning language at school.
Yeah, which, you know, with the Poetry in First Languages program, that's what we see. Our elders and custodians sitting with students and writing poems in language, and it is one of my favourite things to witness. And I really wish I had had that at school. So hopefully you're learning language within your own school. And if you're not, perhaps it's time to have a conversation with your local AECG to bring in your local language custodians and elders and get that conversation started. I think it's a really powerful way to move towards reconciliation within our nation.
What does it taste like?
Oh, I wonder.
That's for your next writing prompt.
I thought it might taste like bush medicine and bush tucker being taught in the classroom, and hopefully you have a really wonderfully resourced bush medicine garden and it's not looking too sad in winter. Yeah, but with all things seasonal. Our next one is...
What does it smell like?
Yeah, I wonder.
This is important. Have a think about some good smells or interesting smells or earthy smells. That might help. We had Reconciliation from the Heart smells like smoking ceremonies before welcome and acknowledgements at all events. I'll never forget the first one that I experienced. I can really still smell that eucalyptus in the air now.
So special.
Really incredible smell, and it means so much.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, smoking ceremonies have been used for ceremony traditionally for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, to try and prepare the space, to cleanse the space, to welcome ancestor and spirit into the space before beginning a different event or a ceremony. So very sacred, very special, and perhaps you've witnessed one, and if not, chat to your teachers. It might be time to get an acknowledgement of country or a welcome underpinned by a really special smoking ceremony from a local elder or custodian in your area. We're wondering what reconciliation from the heart means to you. So that's our next prompt, and then we will have a totally complete poem, which is very exciting, and maybe this is your very first poem. What a beautiful poem. Thank you.
We had Reconciliation from the Heart means listening deeply and understanding our past. We speak and listen from the heart, and we make change. So if we read out our whole poem, all we need you to do is just have a listen. Reconciliation from the Heart looks like First Nations recognition in the Constitution. It sounds like a First Nations Prime Minister being inducted in Parliament. It feels like sitting with aunties and learning language at school. It tastes like bush tucker and medicine being taught in the classroom. It smells like smoking ceremonies before welcome and acknowledgement at all events. And it means listening deeply and understanding our past. We speak and listen from the heart, we make change. And you know what, Kirli? It is a really powerful poem. We actually used some really interesting techniques in there in spite of ourselves.
Yeah.
There's some really strong imagery in there. Creating a strong, powerful image. Did you do that with your poem?
Did you paint the picture with your words? Because imagery is a really beautiful and simple technique to use when writing a poem, or in any kind of form of prose as well.
That's right. So that's our poem. It might inspire you to move forward with it. You might want to create and build on this poem. You might want to go beyond the senses and really explore imagery or alliteration, or even make an acrostic poem. There's many different things that you could do with your teachers. Maybe that's a challenge for upcoming NAIDOC week.
And you know, this year's theme is Voice Treaty Truth, which I think ties really closely in with the Reconciliation Challenge theme of speaking and listening from the heart. And hopefully in the coming weeks, you'll be on holidays for a little bit of that, but hopefully when you return to school, or maybe before you leave, that you get to have a really honest conversation about NAIDOC week and those different facets of voice and treaty and truth, of speaking and listening from the heart.
And maybe you could even incorporate language into your poems. So the words Nagunagula and Mirran that we explored today, you might want to go and ask your friends if they know any other languages where there's similar meanings. I'm sure that you'll be able to collect some more words.
Definitely.
I challenge you to do that.
Yeah, and if you are including language, it's always really important to make sure that you acknowledge the elders or custodians that you're learning language from. It's a really important thing to make sure that we're sharing respectfully and responsibly at all times, particularly around language and cultural knowledge. The next thing that I wanted to include were just some photos of some of the different visual poetry that I've made. So I really love writing, but when I can't find the words, I love to make art. So on that left-hand side there is a wall in our bedroom.
Wait, you painted on your wall?
I painted on my wall. And I used to do this as a kid too, and Dad would always get a little bit upset. So I don't encourage you to paint on your wall, you'll get in trouble. But if you're going to knock them out like we are, because we're renovating, go nuts. I've also got some different pictures there, just drawn with texture on paper, and then a canvas as well that's been painted with fluid art, which is super fun. And this is what I do when I can't find the words to create a poem. I'll try and paint the poem instead, and then later I'll write a poem that accompanies the artwork. So perhaps that's the way that you'd like to go with your submission for the challenge. Maybe you'd like to make a piece of art and accompany that with a piece of writing, and include those in your entry. Perhaps you'd like to write a song. Maybe it's a recipe or a story, or any kind of self-expression that feels really appropriate for you. That would be really, really special. And here's how you can submit your entries. So there's a link down the bottom there. Teachers, you'll need to grab a copy of that online entry form and shoot through the copies of your students' works. This is open for students in years 5 to 9. So if you're outside of that, not a worry at all. Thank you so much for participating. And we'd still love to see your entries, so please email them through. And a reminder that this has to be original, it has to be creative, and it has to talk to the theme of speaking and listening from the heart.
Well, we do have some questions that we've got to get through, and this might actually help if you're thinking about writing but you actually have no idea where to start.
Yeah.
And the first question, Kirli, that we've had is, where do you like to write? Where do you like to write at home?
Well, I suppose on that theme of connecting to country, I always feel a little more creative after I've been outside. I'm a saltwater woman through my family lines on my matrilineal and my patrilineal side. So spending time in the saltwater, going for a surf, walking the dog on the beach, I find always to be a really great prompt for starting to write.
Am I allowed to call myself a saltwater woman?
Sure you can.
Okay, I'm going to have that.
I think if you have an inclination towards a particular landscape, sitting on the earth and on country in that particular place is always a really good spot to start with your writing. Although sand does get in your book.
Yeah, it does.
It's not that much fun.
It gets everywhere.
What
But
about-
that's okay.
What about you? Do you have a special place you
I
like to write?
do. Look, I have an office that's perfect. It's got a lovely, comfy, ergonomic chair. It's got monitors. I should be writing there, but where do you think I write? I write on the lounge. It is the most comfortable place on earth. I've even got a heated blanket. That makes it a lot easier. It means I sit down for longer and write for longer.
Yeah.
One of the things that I do get asked about a lot, though, is I can write a great first sentence, but how do I keep going after that? That's one of the real challenges of being a writer. So it really depends on what you want to put out there. Sometimes I plan what I want to write. Sometimes I have a great idea for a short story and I think, I'm a genius, I'm going to do this, I'm just going to make this story sing. I write one sentence and then nothing. The second sentence, where am I going with this story? What's at the heart of the story? A bit like the reconciliation discussion. What's at the heart of our discussion? What are we trying to say today? We're trying to say we're having a conversation about some often difficult subjects.
Yeah.
Writing can be really hard sometimes, but when it flows, it can be really, really rewarding, particularly if you have an ending that was a genius ending that you didn't see coming and then you created it and you think, I'm on track to win the Miles Franklin. This is brilliant.
One thing that I find really helps with that process of setting down the idea. So personally, I don't tend to write text until I feel it's ready to be written in full. And if I can't write the text in its whole entirety, then I capture the fragments of it and store them somewhere, and I'll come back to it in 6 months or a year or 2 years.
Really? So you keep stories on ice
in
and
whole
fragments?
Yeah, because I can't. It doesn't feel authentic to pad them out yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I like to live in the meantime. And sometimes if I do find that I'm getting stuck, I'll have a little brain dump on the page. I'll just pour everything out that's stuck up here onto a page and write madly. A stream of consciousness exercise for 5 to 10 minutes, start to finish, and my pen doesn't leave the page. I just write and write and write. When I get stuck writing, I'll write, I can't write or I don't know what to write. I'll just repeat that until I find the rest of the words. And then from there, underline some things that I find to be helpful.
Okay, that's really interesting. Good advice for me too, because sometimes I write a terrible first line and it's not genius.
But isn't it nice to know that
But
even
it's good to
someone
know I'm
as
not alone.
successful as you can write even a terrible line? It gives me a lot of hope, and hopefully it gives you a little bit of hope too.
Yeah, and what we've done today with the poem that we've crafted together, it's a quick poem, but we wrote it from the heart, and that's what today's workshop was all about. You may go home and turn it into a song. You might put dance moves to it. You might sing it from the rooftops. You might write a guitar solo for it. That's also being creative. But all of that just takes passion, but it also takes time. So if you really want to work on your writing, it is something that you practice. I mean, after all, you don't run a marathon overnight.
Yes.
You have to train for something like that. And it's the same with writing.
And it's lots of editing too, isn't it, Yvette?
Yeah.
Like I know with my own writing, a book will go through 5 revisions maybe before it gets into its published phase. So the piece that you've written today might need to be sat with and massaged and rethought before you submit it, and we can't wait to read them.
We can't wait. It's also a really good opportunity to reflect on some of the words we've used today. Some of those words, the Constitution, NAIDOC, getting back to actually understanding what reconciliation means and what conversations with First Nations people can look like, or with, with other people. So it's actually how we come together and talk about big issues. So if there are things today that you haven't understood or you've forgotten or aren't clear, you can talk to your teacher about it, or ask your classmates, talk to your friends. Maybe they can remind you. You can also do your own research.
Definitely. And with the awareness that NAIDOC Week and Reconciliation Week happen for 1 week each within the year, but NAIDOC, that celebration of First Nations people and culture, and reconciliation, the coming together of all cultures with awareness of the past to move forward with unity into the future, these are things that happen all year round. And they start with conversations with your friends.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed our conversation.
Yes.
We did share it with a lot of people, Kirli,
We
so that's
did.
been great.
Very exciting.
And we're really thrilled that you've been able to join us. We want to just give a shout out to Kurawatha Public because we can see you guys.
And we've seen you madly
You have
writing.
been amazing.
Thank you.
Well done. Give us the thumbs up. Love it. But also the other high schools that are joining us.
Yeah, thank
we
you.
really tackled some big issues here today. It's been
Definitely.
a start of a really good conversation and we really hope you continue it in your classroom and at home.
And teachers, there will be a survey coming around as well. So if you'd like to provide any feedback or record any notes, or if you have any questions for us, please shoot them through. And we look forward to seeing you soon and reading all of your entries. Take care.